6 geese. For trespassers. One very bad decision. The day Brenda Zimmerman, HOA president and self-appointed neighborhood dictator, stepped over my fence with her little crew, she had no idea she was about to meet Cornbread. And Cornbread doesn't negotiate. My name is Walter Nollin. Retired wildlife officer. 30 years tracking animals, enforcing conservation laws, and learning that the most dangerous creatures on Earth aren't bears or mountain lions. They're bored people with a little bit of power. I bought my property specifically because of the pond. Half an acre of quiet water, cattails along the edges, and enough space to breathe without someone telling me how to do it. I'd rescued 6 geese from a meat farm 2 years before moving in. They weren't pets exactly. They were companions. Smart, loyal, and better at reading people than most folks I'd met on the job. They kept pests out of the yard, fertilized the grass, and sounded the alarm whenever something wasn't right. Best security system I ever had. Life was simple. Quiet. Exactly the way I wanted it. But peace never lasts long when someone like Brenda lives 3 houses down. Brenda Zimmerman had been HOA president for 4 years by the time I moved in. And in those 4 years, she had turned a normal neighborhood into her personal kingdom. I watched her bully a retired schoolteacher into repainting her shutters because the color was, quote, inconsistent with community aesthetics. I watched her fine an elderly widow for having a flower box on her porch. I watched her force a young family to take down their Christmas lights in December because, according to Brenda, they were too bright and created unnecessary visual disturbance. She had a clipboard, a set of self-written bylaws she treated like scripture, and a trio of loyalists who followed her everywhere. Judith, Carol, and Donna. Her book club. Her enforcement squad. Her audience. Everyone in the neighborhood had a Brenda story. Most of them involved fines, threats, or passive-aggressive letters slipped under doors. She thrived on control. And the moment she realized I wasn't afraid of her, I became her favorite project. I thought I'd seen the worst of her. I was wrong. It started on a Tuesday morning. I was kneeling in the pond muck, pulling out a stubborn cattail root, when I heard her voice cutting through the air like a car alarm. Walter. Walter Nollin. I turned slowly. There she was, standing at the edge of my property in wedge sandals, arms crossed, cardigan so bright it hurt to look at. Behind her, the full squad. All 4 of them dressed like they were headed to brunch, not standing at the edge of someone's muddy yard. She told me the geese were a menace. That her husband had been chased. That multiple neighbors had complained. I told her not to walk on my property if she was worried about being chased. She told me she had every right to inspect for community compliance. I pointed to my fence and told her that fence meant stay out. She clicked her tongue, waved her hand like I was slow, and kept talking. I stopped listening and walked back toward the pond. I could hear her whispering to Judith and Carol behind me. Plotting something. I could feel it. That should have been the end of it. It wasn't. I had barely taken 10 steps when I heard the clang of my gate latch. I spun around. All 4 of them had walked straight into my fenced backyard like they owned it. Brenda had her phone out, filming. We're documenting violations, she announced. This is for community safety. Something cold settled in my chest. I told them clearly, loudly, that they were trespassing and needed to leave immediately. Brenda smiled. You can't threaten us, she said. That was the moment I made my decision. I walked to the goose pen, reached down, and unclipped the latch. The gate swung open. And 6 geese came charging out like feathery missiles. Cornbread hit first. He went straight for Brenda's wedge sandal with the focus of a heat-seeking missile. She screamed so loud the birds across the pond took flight. Judith tripped over her own handbag and went down hard. Carol ran in the wrong direction and walked straight into the pond, shoes and all. Donna tried to scale my fence and got stuck halfway up, one leg dangling, shrieking for help that wasn't coming. And Brenda, she was spinning in circles waving her phone while Cornbread nipped at her ankles with the patience of someone who had waited his whole life for this moment. I leaned against the fence post and watched. I had cameras. Every angle of that yard was covered. I was already thinking about my lawyer. But what happened next, I never saw coming. 2 days later, an official HOA complaint landed in my mailbox. Aggressive livestock. Hostile behavior toward board members. Intent to cause emotional distress. I read it twice, then I laughed until my eyes watered. That same evening, Brenda sent a mass email to the entire neighborhood warning everyone that I had unleashed wild animals on HOA representatives and was a danger to the community. So I replied to everyone. No words. No explanation. Just the footage. All of it. Brenda hopping my fence. Her crew walking into my yard uninvited. And then for grown women screaming and running from 6 geese in broad daylight. Within an hour, neighbors were knocking on my door. Laughing, high-fiving, asking if Cornbread was available for hire. The neighborhood was waking up. And then Dave knocked on my door and changed everything. Dave lived 2 houses down. Quiet guy. Careful. He pulled me aside on my porch and lowered his voice. You know Brenda's been using HOA funds for those inspections? He said. She hired a private landscaper to review lawn compliance. Her son-in-law. We've been paying him through our dues. My eyebrows went up. You got proof? Dave nodded slowly. His wife Lorna was on the finance committee. She'd been watching for months and she was done staying quiet. The next evening, Lorna sat at my kitchen table and opened a manila envelope thick with printed spreadsheets. $8,000 paid to a landscaping company last year alone. But here was the problem. None of the addresses listed for the work matched any real properties in the neighborhood. Some invoice numbers went as high as 327. We only had 84 houses. Fake invoices. Funneled money. And a son-in-law collecting a check for work that was never done. Brenda had no idea what was coming. But she was about to find out. I called Cal Morgan. Old colleague from my wildlife officer days. He'd spent 15 years as a state fraud investigator before retiring early. He showed up in a faded denim jacket looking like he'd rather be fishing. But the moment he saw the documents, something switched on behind his eyes. She's sloppy, he muttered. Same invoice numbers on different dates. Rookie mistake. He took the files, made some calls, and within days had submitted a report to the County Fraud Division and shared everything with the Oregon Department of Justice. Meanwhile, Brenda must have caught wind of something because she called an emergency board meeting and tried to put my property under something she invented called temporary behavior review status. It wasn't in the bylaws. I checked twice. I decided it was time for a show and tell. The community clubhouse was packed that Thursday. People who hadn't shown up to a meeting in years were there, whispering, nodding at me as I walked in. Brenda stood at the front with her pearl necklace crew, banging her little wooden gavel. She launched into her speech about community standards and my aggressive animals. I raised my hand. She ignored it. I raised it higher. She sighed and said I'd get my turn. I stepped forward anyway and held up a flash drive. Cal stood up from the back of the room. That shut everyone up. He introduced himself, explained his background, and then told the room he'd submitted a report to the County Fraud Division and shared documents with the State Department of Justice. 3 counts of misappropriation. Over a dozen falsified invoices. Felony territory. The room went silent. Then Lorna stood up with printed spreadsheets. Then Dave spoke. Then neighbors started shouting about inspections that never happened and fines they'd paid for violations that were never documented. Brenda looked around the room and realized she'd lost it completely. She tried to call a recess. Nobody moved. She was voted out before the night was over. But she wasn't done fighting. And neither were we. 3 nights after the meeting, Cornbread started honking like a fire alarm at 2 in the morning. I threw on a jacket and ran outside just in time to see two figures bolting from my yard. One ducked behind a neighbor's trash cans. The other cleared the fence into the dark. My cameras caught everything. One of them had been reaching for the goose pen with a flashlight. The other was holding a sack. Cal traced the vehicle from the footage to a shell company registered at the same address as Brenda's fake cleaning business. The second man was her nephew. A record for theft and assault. They had come after my animals. That was the last mistake they ever made. We went to the press. Cal had a contact at the local news station. We handed over everything. The fake invoices. The bank statements. The trespassing footage. The gate incident. The restraining order. The full Cornbread video. The segment aired 2 nights later and the fallout was immediate. More neighbors came forward. The DA's office requested 5 years of HOA financials. Judith and Donna both lawyered up within 48 hours. Detectives raided a storage unit Brenda had leased under an alias. Inside they found 8 boxes of documents, 2 laptops, and a safe containing 27 cashier checks made out to companies that existed only on paper. Total embezzled funds crossed $30,000. Brenda was arrested on 5 felony counts. Her mugshot made the local paper. The HOA was dissolved. A financial mediator was appointed. Whatever funds remained were returned to homeowners. Dave and Lorna were voted onto the new interim council unanimously. The neighborhood threw a potluck on the green belt that weekend. Kids rode bikes. People laughed. Someone brought a sign that said Cornbread for mayor and it got more applause than any HOA memo ever had. I put a new sign on my fence. It read, "Private property. No trespassing. Geese patrolled. Violators will be documented, prosecuted, and publicly embarrassed." People started taking photos with it. Someone printed it on mugs as a community fundraiser. The geese went back to sunbathing and honking at squirrels. The pond got quiet again. And justice, when it finally came with honking wings, muddy beaks, and one very satisfied gander who had no idea he'd started it all.